Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. So we probably, maybe today, probably next Thursday, we'll finish covering the RPA. So we've basically covered all of paragraph 3, which is the negotiating part of the RPA, right? It's where we put in costs. So we put in the terms of the offer, the time periods, all that stuff. We're almost done with paragraph 3. What we're going to go through today is the very end of paragraph 3 with the other terms, and then now into the explanation paragraphs that we see on the right-hand side of this column here, right? So this is all 3Q. And then the explanation, the more in detail explanation of what this paragraph 3Q means, we'll get to that kind of stuff today. So any questions before I share my screen? And we're off and running. All right, let's get going then. And all right, so what you guys should be looking at right now is the very end of page 3 of the purchase agreement. And like I said, where we finished last week was talking about the home warranty and, you know, the right way to write your offer with the home warranty, that if you put an amount in, right, in this case we were talking about $700, you got to put in what your coverages are, because if you don't put any coverages in this paragraph here, in this portion of the paragraph here, then you're asking for a basic home warranty. When you are selecting your service providers, whether that be Old Republic, Fidelity, or First American, whoever you're doing, right, you got to make sure, especially as a buyer's agent, that you are identifying the rep you work with, because if we don't do that, when it goes to escrow, if we just have the name of the company, Old Republic Home Protection, then they'll pick their rep will get the credit for the order. So you got to make sure that you're at least identifying the rep that gets to be used. Okay. I know we didn't cover a lot on home warranty today. That was all last week. Anybody have any questions on home warranty before I move to other terms? Okay. So in other terms, this is basically just anything else that I need to add into the agreement, right? So it could be something as easy as subject to interior inspection. Now, there's something I want to tell you guys about subject to interior inspection, because I think that people misunderstand how that works. And I've had a lot of conversations with agents about it. So if, for example, a property is not available, right? I mean, available, but is not available for us to enter and look at prior to writing an offer. It happens a lot of time with units, happens a lot of times when you have tenants, right? So single families have that, you know, units have that where you can't get into specific units. So as part of my protection of buyer, my offer is subject to the interior inspection of that property. When you write an offer like that, what is supposed to happen is that offer is either supposed to be accepted or rejected. And if it's accepted, it's like an additional little contingency period. Okay. It means that if I get my offer accepted and within 1 day, 2 days, 4 days, 5 days, I do my interior inspection of the property and I don't like the condition. Now, this is not about your physical inspection. This is not about hiring a home inspector. This is just about walking in and being able to visually see the inside of the property, which we hadn't seen up until that point. If I don't find the condition of the property to be acceptable, I can now say, I want to cancel the offer. I want to move on. So for us as buyers, really, when we write subject to interior inspection, if we want to be really super clear, we could do, you know, subject to interior inspection within 48 hours of acceptance, right? We want to make it something that's not crazy long, so that it's something that you would do prior to, you know, putting your deposit in, prior to doing that, prior to hiring inspectors, doing all that stuff, so that it's not part of your time periods. And if I'm a listing agent and I get an offer that's like this, then I want to put a time period on it for sure, right? And I don't have to if I'm a buyer's agent, but if I'm a listing agent, I want to, because what I'm going to do is if I say your interior inspection is to take place between, within 48 hours of acceptance, if you don't do it, then it becomes a thing that I can use a notice to perform for to now move forward, like either get you to take action or cancel and get out from the transaction if your guys aren't taking action. So those are the kind of things that we want to add. Subject to interior inspection. When we do that, for sellers specifically, there needs to be a time period on there on when you're doing it. But what you guys need to understand as listing agents and also as buyer's agents, when you submit or you receive an offer that is subject to interior inspection, you need to present it, accept it, and then they do their interior inspection. What I see a lot of with outside agents and even agents' offices, they accept these offers that are subject to interior inspection. Then they send them to show, then they accept the offer. That's not how subject to interior inspection works. It's not the right way to do it. Charlie, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Hey, good morning, everyone. Morning, Kyle.
Good morning.
So, when would this occur? Other terms subject to interior inspection. When would this occur?
When you don't have access to the property to see the inside, like we said with tenants, whether that be a single family or with units. It's just when the buyer themselves don't have access to the interior of the property. That's what that's for. Okay. Any other questions about that? Just understand that if you're gonna offer, like if you're gonna make it one of the conditions that they're sending their offer subject to interior inspection, then you got to accept the offer to make it subject to, right? So that they can move forward. If you're not going to do that, then what you should do is say, okay, everybody who wants to submit an offer, all the buyer inquiries, we're going to show it on this date. Then you can see it, then you can submit your offer. If that's what you want to do, if you want to collect offers, let everybody see it, and then whoever decides they like it, that's the offer you go with, then don't do subject to interior inspection. Don't get the offers in. Make a state, hey, property is, put it on coming soon so that there's no chance of a violation in the MLS, and say this property will be available to view on this date from this time to this time, and that's it. If you want to see it, that's when you'll be able to see it, and then submit offers after the fact. If that's how you're going to do it, then that's how you should do it. Zuli, you had a question.
Yes, and after you see your buyers see the property, how do you clear that? Do you send an addendum or something?
Yeah, an amendment of existing agreement terms. I know I harp on this. You guys stop using addendums. Addendums are just for space, period. That's it. I mean, I see it from outside. I can't control them, but I can control you guys, and you love to use addendums. It's an amendment of existing agreement terms. So what you would do is just do the amendment of existing agreement terms. Buyers, has inspected the property has done their visual inspection of the property on this date and chooses to move forward with the transaction. That's it. And you're done. And from a listing agent like Parta, and I missed it in the counters, it should be buyer to, do their visual inspection of the property within 48 hours of acceptance and deliver written approval and authorization to move forward with a transaction or cancellation. Like, you want to make it as fast as possible because it's subject to, and I have backup offers, and I need people that I need to keep taking action. Any other questions? Okay. Here is also, for example, if you yourself, the buyer's agent, are representing yourself as the purchase, or if it's the entity that is purchasing, like a corporation or a partnership, you are involved with that. You've got to disclose that you are licensed and that you are a principal in this transaction. So this is where you would do it. Okay, you're required to do it. So it would be something like, seller to be aware, buyer's agent is representing themselves as buyer, right? If you're representing yourself. I know it seems like it should be crystal clear, right? Your name is there as buyer's agent, your name is there as buyer, but we have to take that additional step to let them know that, yes, I am representing myself. Okay, I got to do that. Or if I put award, look at that, misspelled aware, didn't even notice. If we are like a partner in a corporation, seller to be aware, buyer's agent is an officer in the corporation that is acting as buyer. We have to disclose that. You have to let them know that. You can't avoid it. You can't say, well, I'm not the buyer. I'm not the one signing the documents, so my hands are clean. No, it doesn't work that way. You've got to disclose that you have an interest as the buyer, okay? For the listing agent, you don't do that in the offer, obviously, but you've got to make sure you're doing that in the counters, that's happening. The other thing that is buyer's agent is related to buyer. If you're related to the buyer, you've got to disclose it. Now, sometimes we go a little bit farther just to be super conservative and aware to make sure we're doing anything. We have, some of the agents here that are related to lenders, that if the lender's representing their buyer, that they're disclosing that they're representing to the lender, just so that it's clear, right? Just to make sure it's clear, just to make sure that even the buyer knows that there's a relationship between the two, just so it's, transparent. That's what we'd like to do. Okay. If you're not right, if you're not the principal, but let's say you're representing another agent, buyer is a licensed real estate agent in the state of California. The reason that you need to disclose that is because we're held to a higher standard. So even if I don't have, I'm not using the responsibility of my license as the agent, I'm not representing myself, somebody else is representing me, I still have a higher standard. So I'm held to a higher standard. I've got to disclose that. Okay, I have to disclose that. So this is what this is for. This section of other terms, that's the kind of stuff it's for. Anything else that I need to make sure is clear and is always that is included in our transaction. Okay? Questions about other terms? Okay. And just know, you guys are required to... Yes, Danny, go ahead.
Hey, so a quick question. I don't know if you I went through this portion, but is this where we actually stipulate that the buyer is participating with the down payment assistance program?
No. No, that's back with additional financing terms. That's way back here. Right here is in 3G2 is where you would address that. Okay, moving on. So we've finished with paragraph 3. Now we're going to get into the more explanation part of the contract, the parts where we're really not filling stuff out. So these are any of the addenda or advisories that are going to be included. And if earlier, like for example, the TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum, if we included that earlier in paragraph 3, it'll already be checked here. We won't have to check it. Okay, this probate purchase agreement, a purchase addendum right here, if you check it up here, and I know maybe I'm making you guys dizzy, there is, I'm sorry, that's on the listing side. If this is a probate, then this is what we have to check and put that in there, that's being included. If it's a manufactured home, we've got to check that and put that it's included. All of these things, if they're being used as part of the purchase agreement, we have to make sure that the boxes are checked and that they're included, right? Addendums, if we have an addendum that is used for filling in space, right? Like we run out of space in certain sections, we have to check the box and put which number of addendums we have there, okay? The backup offer addendum. If I'm a buyer's agent and I already know that I'm going to be a backup offer, and I've had the conversation with the listing agent and said, hey, I know we're a backup offer, I'm sending you with the backup offer addendum, then we got to make sure that this is checked off. Now, if we get it as a counter offer, then we don't need to include it. It's not going to be included or checked off there. Short sale addendum, if I'm writing an offer on a short sale, I'm going to check off that box, make sure it's included. The septic well, property monument, and propane addendum, that's if it has a septic tank or a well or any of those things, I want to make sure that's included. The buyer's intent to exchange, if this is a purchase of me exchanging out of another income property into a different income property, that needs to be included. The seller's intent to exchange, I'm not going to include it generally because other than I know, that's something that needs to be sent in from the seller. And then any other addenda that you may have to incorporate into the transaction. The advisories, they're already checked off, most of them, right? The buyer's investigation advisor, the wire fraud, the fair housing, the consumer protect, that stuff is already checked off because it comes with the package, right? It always is included. The wildfire disaster advisory, only necessary if the property is in a high or very high fire zone. We really don't know that until we get the NHD report, so you don't need to include that. Trust advisory is only required if we're writing an offer on a property that is a trust sale with the successor trustee as the principal. If it's the original trustees, the original owners that set up the trust, they're still alive, that trust advisory is not necessary. It's only for the successor trustees, which means that the original trustees had either passed or are incapacitated and the successor trustee is taking care of it. The statewide buyer and seller advisory needs to be included in your transaction. If you don't want to send it with your offer, that's okay because it's 12 pages. So you got 16 pages of contract and 8 pages of other addenda that are going with this, plus the statewide buyer and seller advisory. It's a lot to send with your offer. So it's okay if it's not checked off, but it does need to be included with your transaction. REO advisory is only for writing offers on REO properties. Same with the probate. And the short sale information advisory is only with short sales. That's it. Okay. Questions about any of the advisories, addendum, anything? Okay. All right. So here we go. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, Kyle, just really quick. So when we're in the MLS and we're checking the type property, the sale that it says standard, and then right there it says trust. Mm-hmm. That's when we utilize this addendum, right?
The trust, yeah, I would. If they put it as a trust, that I would assume that means that it's the successor trustee selling it. Okay. So then I would include that trust advisory with my offer. Yeah, absolutely.
When we see it in the MLS, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Additional terms affecting purchase price. Now, this is just detail about paragraph 3D1, right? Buyer shall deliver deposit directly to escrow holder if a method other than wire transfer is specified in paragraph 3D1 and such method is unacceptable to escrow holder, then upon notice from escrow holder, delivery shall be by wire transfer. So the escrow holder could say, sorry, we don't accept anything but wire transfers. And if they do that, then the buyer would have to go back and do that. Most people are only going to do wire transfers anyway. I mean, that's what I want you guys to do. If you ever write an offer that says it's going to be a cashier's check and you do that, you've actually got to get a copy of that check. And it's just a nightmare. Just keep it as wire transfers because I don't want you guys handling checks. I don't want them giving them to us. The chances of them going into escrow and delivering them on time also causes some issues. So let's leave it with wire transfer and make sure you're doing a wire transfer. I don't know how many times lately that I've seen escrows being delayed or deals almost canceling because buyers are going to the bank and they're trying to do ACH transfers, right? Like if you're paying your bill online, that's not a wire transfer. It's not the same thing. So you got to make sure that your buyer understands that they've got to complete a wire transfer and get the wiring instructions from escrow. They've got to use those wiring instructions. So make sure that you're really clear on that with your buyers because I've seen it a lot lately and I was surprised about that. Here's more detail of increased deposit that we've talked about in the past. Increased deposit specified in paragraph 3D2 is to be delivered to escrow holder in the same manner as the initial deposit. So if I have an initial deposit of $10,000 and it's going by wire transfer, and then 14 days later, I'm going to put an additional $10,000 in because that's when I have access to the funds, it also has to be delivered by a wire transfer. Okay. If the parties agree to liquidated damages in this agreement, they also agree to incorporate the increased deposit into the liquidated damages amount by signing a new liquidated damages clause, CAR Form DID, at the time of the increased deposit is delivered to escrow. So just so you guys can see what the DID looks like, it is, let's look it up right now so I can show it to you guys. Delivery of increased deposit. And that is this one. So delivery of increased deposit and liquidated damages addendum. It gives the property address, the date of the contract, who the parties are. And then it says, by depositing on this date, right, whatever the date is, the sum of whatever the amount is by wire funds, buyer hereby increases the total deposit of dollars to, so 10 is now $20,000. And by signing this right here, the way it is by default, we're agreeing to that 20,000 is part of the liquidated damages clause that we'll get to later in the contract. Go ahead, Charlie. You had your hand up.
Hey, Kyle. So that $20,000 would be at risk if you cancel, or would it just be the 10,000?
No,
Let's see
all of it. The 20,000 would be subject to the liquidated damages, just like the total amount would be. So you guys have to understand, liquidated damages is a 3% max on properties that are not more than 4 units and they're not being purchased by an investor. So it has to be somebody that's living in it. And we'll get to that later on. So if you're selling something for, $700,000, 3% is what, $21,000. So if I have $20,000 in there and I breach the contract, so Charlie had said if they cancel, they lose the deposit. It's not if they cancel. It's if they breach the contract, which means they cancel the contract without the right to do that. So as long as you guys do everything right, that $20,000 is only at risk if you remove all your contingencies and then do something like choose to cancel. That's when it's at risk, and that's it. Okay. Retention of deposit, paragraph 29, again, we'll get to that. That's the liquidated damages clause. If initialed by all parties or otherwise incorporated in this agreement, specifies a remedy for buyer's default. Buyer and seller are advised to consult with a qualified California real estate attorney before adding any other clause specifying a remedy, such as release or forfeiture of deposit or making deposit non-refundable, for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the Civil Code and regarding possible liability and remedies if buyer fails to deliver the deposit. So what they're saying is that, you see these counter offers where listing agents will say, immediately the deposit is non-refundable. Like, you're never getting your deposit. If you don't close this escrow, you're not getting your money back. That's not legal. The Civil Code doesn't allow for that. There has to be proof of damage. You can't just say, I get it, and that's it. Now, in a case where you have the contingencies and you follow the normal procedure where a buyer removes their contingencies and then does something to breach the contract, and you want to try to retain their deposit, and you can show proof that it's valid and that you have cause to have that deposit, then you're not violating the Civil Code. So that's the thing, is you got to be really careful just by saying, oh, you're not going to get it. You're not getting it back. Once you sign that contract, you're stuck in there. Well, that's not true. It doesn't work like that. Okay. So just follow the procedures in the contract. Don't try to stick it to buyer's agents as a listing agent and say that's it. Your deposit is non-refundable, or you're going to sign and release the deposit right now to the seller. Even if that were the case, that you release the deposit to get your offer accepted, they would still owe you the money back because of liquidated damages and how it works. Okay? Questions?
Kyle,
Yes.
okay, let's say if buyer and seller don't have an agreement and who's going to get the deposit, and escrow will hold it for how
Yes.
long? And what is
3
going to happen with that
They'll
money?
They'll hold it for 3 years.
And
Then it will escheat to the state. Then the secretary, what is it? It's the is it the state treasurer will have a website that you can go to, and it'll have your name associated with it. And if you can show proof that that's your money, they'll release it to you. But escrow will hold it for 3 years. Now, there's no way that you should ever let it sit there for 3 years, because depending on the amount of your deposit, either buyer or seller is going to go to small claims court or to liquidate or to mediation arbitration, and they're going to file against the seller or the buyer, and they're going to file against escrow, and then escrow will get a court order, whether that's small claims or it's a mediator and arbitrator, and they'll release the funds to the appropriate party. You're not going to wait that long, but that's the only recourse you have. If you guys can't come to a decision on signing something and releasing the deposit, now here's the other issue that you have to deal with. If the buyer has breached the contract, right? They removed their contingencies, they acted in bad faith, and they canceled the deal, and the seller's trying to retain the deposit. And the seller does the whole thing, fights, says, I'm keeping it. I'll put my house on hold. I'll sell it after, just on principle. I want your money. If you guys go to court because the buyer refuses to release the deposit, whether that be small claims or it's liquidated damage, or it's a dispute resolution where you go through mediation arbitration, the seller can ask your buyer ask the court for an additional $1,000 civil penalty for breaching the contract, and they'll probably get it. So not only will your buyer lose their deposit, but they'll be responsible for an additional $1,000. So sometimes you have to really think about the idea of how hard you're going to fight when you're wrong. And it works the same way with the seller. If the buyer has done everything they're supposed to, they haven't removed contingencies, and then based on the condition or their appraised value or their ability to get the loan approved, they choose to cancel and they have their contingencies in place, and your seller is saying, oh, I'm not going to give them their deposit back, and you got to go through small claims or mediation arbitration, the seller could be held to that same $1,000 civil penalty for not following the terms of the contract. So you guys, I know sometimes we throw around like, oh, we'll just hold on to the deposit. Oh, we're just going to, make them sweat a little bit. If it gets to the point where there's actual, legal intervention, it could cost them not only, besides the cost of, if it goes through mediation arbitration, the cost of that, because you have to pay for it. You have to pay for the mediation. You have to pay for the arbitrator. You'll have to pay for an attorney. Not only that cost, but that $1,000 could be tacked on top of it. Okay, so just be really aware of the things that you do. Like we throw around a lot, like, well, I'm going to keep their deposit, or I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to hold on to it, make them. It's like, just follow the terms of the contract, guys. And I know a lot of times we don't follow the terms of the contract because we don't understand it, and you don't want to have the conversation with your seller, and then we get into the position where they should have removed contingencies and didn't, and now it's kind of our fault that we don't get to keep the deposit, so we don't want to have that conversation with the seller. Go ahead, Jesus.
Yes, and a lot of our sellers, they have the contingencies all wrong. They think because a buyer submits an offer, they get to keep the deposit, or they remove one contingency. Now, I always tell my sellers, look, we're here in the business to sell your property, not to keep anybody's deposit. Just let it go and move on. We got to open escrow on the next one. And when you are adamant, when you are strong, when you're confident in what you tell them, they will follow. So if you have a seller who wants to keep it, it's your job to let them know that we're here not to keep the deposit, but to sell the property.
No, I agree with you. No, 100%. You're correct. The problem is that there's two things that are issues. Is some of us as listing agents don't understand how the contingencies in the contract works. Even that we do have some understanding, where we lack the ability to have those kind of very frank conversations with our sellers, where we tell them, hey, listen, we're going to do things the right way. We're afraid of our sellers, and maybe that's a product of our lack of production, and this is my only seller, I can't piss them off because I don't want to lose it. I get that. But yes, absolutely, if your seller doesn't understand the contingencies and why you have to release the deposits, that's an agent issue. That's not a seller issue. That's an agent issue, because you haven't been clear enough with them on how things work and the right process for going through a transaction. And so that just becomes our level of professionalism and what we're really having conversations with our clients about. So yeah, I appreciate that, Jesus. Okay, all cash offer. If an all-cash offer is specified in 3A, no loan is needed to purchase a property. This agreement is not contingent on buyer obtaining a loan. Buyer shall, within the time specified in paragraph 3H1, deliver written verification of funds sufficient to purchase the purchase price and closing costs. So what that says is, if you check off all cash in that very first paragraph, right, in 3A, you have no loan contingency. So if your intent is to get hard money financing and for some reason the conditions are too hard to meet for that hard money loan, you don't have a loan contingency to protect you. And when you write these all cash offers, I see them, you guys write them with no inspection contingency or very short inspection contingencies, or, you know, no appraisal. So if something goes wrong with that hard money loan where you wrote it as all cash and didn't disclose it was hard money, you're putting your buyer's deposit at risk, period, end of story. So just like with the sellers and how we do things the right way, we owe that to our buyers, especially the investors who think they know more than you do, right? That we make sure that we have them write their offers correctly and don't hide things and don't try to subvert how things work or make something look better than it is by saying it's all cash when it isn't. Because when something comes back to bite them in the butt, you're going to be the one that they're going to hold responsible. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, I told you to do it, so I screwed up. They're going to point the finger at you. That's all 100% what's going to happen. So do things right. Do things right. Okay. First loan, we talked about. This loan will provide for conventional financing unless FHA, VA, or seller financing or other is checked in paragraph 3E. That's it. Very straightforward. Additional financed amount. If an additional finance amount is specified in paragraph 3E2, that amount will provide for conventional financing unless seller financing or other is checked. Okay? Very straightforward. These are just quick explanations of those previous paragraphs. Buyer's loan status. Buyer authorizes seller and seller authorized agent to contact buyer's lender to determine the status of any buyer's loan specified in 3E or any alternate loan buyer pursues, whether or not a contingency of this agreement. If the contact information for buyer's lender is different from that provided under the terms of paragraph 6B, buyer shall deliver the updated contact information within 1 day of seller's request. So if I submit an offer and I have a pre-qual letter from one lender, and then the contact information I give to the listing agent, or that pre-qual letter, if they call and the lender's like, I'm not doing that loan, when I turn around as listing agent and say, hey buyer, I need the contact information for your current lender because the lender on the pre-qual letter isn't the right lender, they have 1 day to provide it, which means that if they don't, I can send them a notice to perform and I can cancel on them if they don't give me that. Okay? You guys have to stop fighting. The listing agent has the right to communicate with your lender, and you've got to stop thinking that you can hide away your lender and that they're not supposed to talk to them. Okay? FHA VA. If FHA VA is checked in paragraph 3E, an FHA VA mandatory clause shall be incorporated and signed by all parties. Buyer shall, within the time specified in 3E1, deliver to seller written notice, CAR Form RR or AEA, of any lender requirements that buyer requests seller to pay for or otherwise correct, or that there are no lender requirements notwithstanding seller's agreement that buyer may obtain FHA or VA financing. Seller has no obligation to pay or satisfy any or all lender requirements unless agreed in writing. So you've got the time in paragraph 3E1, which is 17 days by default, and anything that you've changed it to request any lender requirements that you want the seller to be responsible for. But the seller has no obligation to do those repairs unless they've agreed to do it in writing in the past. Okay, so understand that. Balance of purchase price, down payment, including all cash funds, to be deposited with escrow holder pursuant to escrow holder instructions. Very straightforward. This is where we talked about credits, a couple weeks ago. Limits on credits to buyer. Any credit to buyer as specified in paragraph 3G1 or otherwise agreed from any source for closing or other costs that is agreed to by parties, contractual credit, shall be disclosed to buyer's lender, if any, and made at close of escrow. If the total credit allowed by buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit from seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit. And in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there shall be no automatic adjustment to the purchase price to make up for the difference between the contractual credit and the lender allowable credit. So what that's saying is this: I ask you for $10,000 closing credit. The lender only allows $8,000. $2,000 is going back to the seller. And what they're talking about is no automatic reduction in price. The reason for that is because a lot of us write our offers over to incorporate that credit, right? We negotiate that with the listing agent. We say, we need $10,000 in closing costs, so we're writing the offer $10,000 over. And that's how the offer gets accepted. Well, then we get to the point where the property, the lender doesn't allow that whole $10,000. So I'm only getting $8,000, but I'm paying $10,000 more. So there's a $2,000 gap. I'm paying $2,000 more for the property than I should be paying for it. In that case, what do we do? Because it's not automatically reduced. What do? We're supposed to ask for a reduction in the purchase price down to the, to cover only the $8,000. But most of you guys don't do it. You say, well, what, you offered $310. That's it. I'm sorry, it's the lender. That's it. It's not the seller's fault. It's the lender's fault. Doesn't matter. If the intention was the amount I was offering, the $10,000 over the asking price that we negotiated, was to cover that credit, and now I'm not getting that credit, then the purchase price should be reduced to that amount. Now, the seller doesn't have to accept that reduction. But if I, as buyer's agent, don't take the initiative to request that reduction in sales price, then I'm not representing my client properly. And I can tell you from personal experience, because I've gone through this at another company, a buyer's agent did just that. They wrote an offer, let's say $10,000 over asking price for a $10,000 credit. The lender only allowed a $5,000 credit, and the buyer's agent told the buyer, well, that's too bad. You just have to close. So they closed. As soon as they closed, they called the broker directly, and they said, this is what happened. And they laid everything out, and we're going to sue you guys for the difference. It was more than 10,000. Or I think it was about 10,000. I think it was 15,000. They only got 5. It was something crazy. So this happened before I worked there, but I had to be part of it. They told the broker, we're going to sue you for the amount of money that we didn't get because we wrote the offer over. The broker said, okay, you don't need to sue us. We're going to take the agent's commission, and we're going to give you the money that you guys lost because they didn't represent you properly. That agent quit and then sued the brokerage in small claims court for the $10,000 or whatever it was that the broker withheld. And the judge in that case said, as broker, they are also representing the client. You are, you work under the umbrella of that brokerage. And they work, and that client is a client of the brokerage. And the brokerage felt that your misrepresentation of the client warranted that the client was due some compensation. And instead of waiting for a lawsuit, they decided to take your commission and give it to the buyer. And the judge found in favor of the broker. So that agent lost their commission or a chunk of it because they misrepresented their buyer. Even if the seller says, no, I'm not going to reduce the price, we've got to make the request, which means we're going to do an amendment of existing agreement terms saying buyer and seller agree to reduce sales price to $308 based on the reduction of the seller's credit by buyer's lender. And that's it. We send it out. Right? The $8,000 now that that's the reduction of $2,000 in the sales price. If the seller says, no, we're not doing it. Sorry, you wrote it for $10,000 over. You're paying $10,000 over. Now you can go back to the buyer and say, okay, we haven't removed all our contingencies yet. We still have the ability to cancel. We requested it, but they said no, and they don't have an obligation to change. What do you want to do? If the buyer says, it's okay, I want the house, I'm going to go forward, then we go forward, but we have some proof that we tried to do what we were supposed to do. Nobody's going to come back and say, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. Bertha had her hand up first, so Bertha, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Just as a reference, that just happened on a transaction. After we did the home inspection, we found out that one of the garages was burned, and
Uh-huh.
So we went back to the seller and we requested a reduction of price and to correct with the contractor all that issue,
Mm-hmm.
and they did accept it. So we were able to reduce 8,000 the price, plus she corrected whatever needed to be done on the garage. But yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes they're okay. They're
Yeah.
motivated, and you're able to do it, and turn out pretty good. Just as a
Well,
reference, thank you.
yeah, I think that what happens is there's a lot of times where buyers agents are like, oh, we can't ask for that. Just ask. The worst thing they can say is no. They can't cancel on you. They can't do anything. They can't. They can't cancel on you. So as long as you have your contingencies in place, the worst thing they could do is tell you no, you're not going to do it. And then you give your buyers a choice. The problem is that sometimes us as buyers agents, we take away that choice from our buyers because we feel like we have this assumption, we have this story in our head, like the seller's not going for it. The listing agent already told me they're not going to do it, so I'm not even going to ask for it. But then how does that show that I'm doing my fiduciary duty to my buyer? My job is to my buyer, not to how I feel, right? Like, not that I don't want to have anxiety or stress for asking for stuff. No, my job is to represent that buyer. So if the buyer says, hey, listen, I need you to ask for this price reduction because that garage was on fire and they didn't disclose it to us, absolutely, I'm going to ask for it. If they say no, then I get to go back to the buyer and say, okay, we asked, they said no. What do you want to do? And if the buyer says, I'm out, then we're out. But I think there's this fear of speaking to listing agents about that kind of stuff, what the response is going to be. And there's also this fear of, well, the deal might cancel and I lose a commission check. That's the wrong mentality to have when we're in a transaction. So I appreciate that, Bertha. Charlie, go ahead.
Hey Kyle, if the seller doesn't reduce the price to the lender's allowable credit,
Uh-huh.
can we cancel based on the loan contingency?
No. No, you cannot. No, you would only be able to cancel if you had all your other contingencies in place because the loan contingency is only there if you don't qualify for the property the way the offer was written. And the credit is not technically a part of that because it says in here, hey, you got to deal with lender allowable credits. So no, it wouldn't. It wouldn't give you an ability to cancel as long as you still qualified for the loan the way it was.
So what can we cancel on?
If you still have your other contingencies in place, your inspection contingency, especially your inspection contingency is the one thing you can cancel for whatever. But no, that disallowed credit is not going to allow you to use your loan contingency to cancel as long as you still qualify. Now, if let's say you don't have the money because you're not getting that credit and it affects your qualification, then sure, yes, you can. All right. So limits on credits. Just be aware of limits on credits. And the other thing to know with credits is the lender's going to take any credit from your loan officer and you before they go for the seller. So let's say that the total amount of credits you're getting is $10,000. You're getting $2,000 or $1,000 from your lender and $1,000 from you as agent. And then you're getting $8,000 from the seller. If the bank reduces that $10,000 credit to $8,000, they're going to still take the $1,000 from the lender, the $1,000 from you, and then $6,000 from the seller. So the seller's always going to be last in line. They're not going to get their money taken first. Okay. Additional financing terms. This is just about verification of down payment. Written verification of buyer's down payment and closing costs within the time specified in 3H2 may be made by buyer or buyer's lender or loan broker, pursuant to paragraph 6B. And here's 6B. Verification of loan applications. Buyer shall deliver to seller within the time specified in paragraph 3H a letter from buyer's lender or broker stating that, based on a review of buyer's written application and credit report, buyer's pre-qualified or pre-approved for any new loan specified in 3E. If any loan specified in paragraph 3E is an adjustable rate loan, the pre-qualification or pre-approval letter shall be based on the qualifying rate, not the initial loan rate. Buyer stated financing. This is important for you guys to understand too. Seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, including, but not limited to as applicable, all cash, amount of down payment, or contingent or non-contingent loan. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell to buyer in reliance on buyer's specified financing. Buyers shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternative form of financing. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with the buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in the agreement, but shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price on the close of escrow date, even if based upon alternate financing. Buyer's inability to obtain alternate financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to purchase the property and close escrow as specified in this agreement. So, what that's saying is this. If you write your offer as a conventional loan, right, with 10% down, and then you find out that maybe the rate is better on an FHA, so you want to switch to FHA. So you switch to FHA, but instead of continuing with 10% down, you do 3.5% down, you do all that stuff. You go all the way in. The seller's like, hey, if you can close on time, you can do it. That's what happens. That's what the contract says. I can't stop you. But if you don't qualify for that new loan, and then you can't, now you have to switch back to the old loan. If you can't close on time, your loan contingency doesn't protect you. Your loan contingency doesn't protect you if you don't qualify for the new financing if I don't agree to it as seller. So, yes, the seller doesn't have any right to stop you from changing your financing, but they don't have to cooperate with it, which means they don't have to help you with anything. They don't have to do any repairs or do anything to fix it, right? If you switch, they don't have to help you. And if you don't qualify, your loan contingency doesn't protect you. Your loan contingency would only protect you based on the original financing. So you'd have to go back and still be able to close at the same time, which means if you really want to switch without losing your deposit or having a loan contingency in place, you've got to run both concurrently, which means you've got to qualify for the FHA and still continue the process for the conventional, so that if the FHA doesn't work, you just go to the conventional, you still close on time. Nobody's going to do that. That's what the contract is telling you. So basically what they're telling you is you don't get to switch. You don't get to switch. So what I would suggest you guys do if you want to protect your loan contingency and you need to switch your financing is you tell them, hey, seller, to be aware, buyer switching from A to B, right? Whatever it is. That's it. They can't cancel on you. They just have to sign that says they're aware. Now, if they don't sign, if they refuse to sign that amendment of existing agreement terms that you're switching financing, it just means that your loan contingency doesn't protect you. So you better make sure that you can qualify or you stick with that original financing. Okay? Is that fair? Does everybody understand that? Any questions? No? All right. Closing and occupancy. If buyer intends to occupy as primary or secondary residence and unless otherwise agreed, such as in the CAR form TOPA, the TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum, the unit buyer intends to occupy shall be vacant at the time possession is delivered to buyer. And if the property contains more than one unit within 3 days after acceptance, buyer shall give seller written notice of which unit buyer intends to occupy. Occupancy may impact the available financing. Seller shall disclose to buyer if occupied by tenants or persons other than seller, and attach the AR form TOPA in a counteroffer. If not part of buyer's offer. So you got to be able to disclose to them, hey, we can't vacate that unit because it's tenants. And this is, I know I've had this conversation with you guys on the classes and in these videos multiple times, and I have these conversations in person with agents that come here to see me. In the state of California, if it is 2 units or more, the tenant cannot be vacated unless that tenant is in breach of their contract somehow. There has to be cause. Now, the other ways that they can be asked to leave, which would cause them to get paid relocation fees, are if the seller's moving into one of the units, the seller's moving a family member into one of the units, the owner, sorry, let's not say owner, the owner is moving in, an owner's family member is moving in, the owner's putting a manager in place, or they're removing the property from the rental market permanently, which means I'm never going to rent it again, or it needs such extensive construction, right? in order to do whatever rehab you're doing, that it would be uninhabitable, then you could ask them to leave. You could give them notice. In that case, 60-day notice. In any of those cases, here's 60-day notice. In the state of California, I got to pay them 1 month's rent in order to do that for relocation. In the city of Los Angeles, where there's rent stabilization laws, I have to pay them much, much more than that. It could be as little as $9,800. It could be much as $22,000, depending on, the resident. So you have to understand that when you're writing an offer on 2 units and it's FHA and your buyer is going to live in one of them, unless the seller lives in one of those units, it's going to be very difficult to get that property vacant for your FHA buyer. You've got to understand that. And even if somebody tells you they're going to move out, there's a huge chance that they're not going to be able to if there's a tenant. Now, none of this applies to single family. We're only talking about units. So a single family residence, which is a detached house or a condo or a townhouse, those things don't apply. Those rules don't apply, only to units. Zulia, I'm sorry, I saw you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
So do you think that giving a 60-day notice to the tenant after the close of escrow, it's a good chance to have them leaving the property?
I mean, legally you have the right to. So let's, for example, in that case, right, I think I understand what you're asking is, I have a buyer who wants to live in one of the units. They're purchasing it FHA, right? They buy it, close, and immediately upon close, serve a 60-day notice with the intent of, we're living in that unit. You guys have to move out, and we'll pay you the relocation fee. They would have the legal right to do that at that time. Now, the problem is if the tenant fights the eviction, which eventually they will lose as long as they were served properly, it could take longer than the 60 days. And then we get into that weird area of, FHA finding out they're not living in the property, and then it changes their loan and all that stuff, right? That's a problem. But yes, the new owner could do that because they're going to live in it, and they would have every right to do that. It would just be dealing with that process of evicting. Jesus first, and then Bertha. Go ahead, Jesus.
Yes, Kyle. You mentioned this doesn't apply to single home, so it's a farm.
Yeah.
Isn't it also we need to evict them and give them the month notice and everything else, just like a duplex or car?
Yeah. No, you do need to do that, but there is no relocation fee. There's no rule that says I can't evict them to sell the property. Like, if I have a single family house and I want to evict somebody so I can sell it, I could do that. I just have to give them the 60-day notice and go through all the process. On a single family, I can't do that with units. If I want to sell my units to make them vacant, I can't evict them first. That's the difference.
Correct.
That's the difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bertha, go ahead.
It might be related to Jesus' question. So if I'm getting a listing on 2 units, I can ask my client to give the 60-day notice from the beginning of the listing, right? Even though before we go to escrow. You're muted.
You cannot evict the tenant to sell the property. The only way you can evict the tenant is the ways I told you. They have cause. They stopped paying their rent. They broke their agreement, or you're going to move somebody in, or a family or manager. You're removing it from the rental market, or you're going to do extensive construction. That's it. That's the only way you could evict tenants in the state of California, in units. If you want to sell them vacant, you can't. Now, if you want to go to them and you want to negotiate some kind of cash for keys, which is still, a gray area for tenants' rights, if you want to do that and they choose to move out because you paid them $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $25,000, that's an agreement that you made with them. But the law, the way it says, you cannot evict those tenants, period. The only person that could do that would be the owner, because they're going to go live in it.
The new owner.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay,
Kyle,
first, hold on, Lulu. There's a line in front of you here. Maricela, go ahead first.
Kyle, so for writing up an offer FHA, and they're occupied the units, the lender doesn't really know all that, right? So like your intention is like I'm going to buy this property, and then once I become the owner, I'm going to serve them with the 60-day. After that, you have no control. So are you saying that that the lender is going to be looking into that, like for financing,
Well,
like they won't want to
they could. Sure, absolutely, they could. Absolutely, they could. But remember, when you write your offer, you have to include the TOPA, which means the box is checked on the purchase agreement for a tenant-occupied property. So that's part of the contract. They're gonna want to see that. And if the lender, and FHA is not dumb, they're gonna look, guys. I'm telling you right now that there is still probably people out there that are knocking on doors for buyers that said, I'm going to live in the property, and the bank, FHA, the bank, they're checking to make sure that the seller's living there. And if they're not, if the buyer's not living there, they could call the loan. They could accelerate the loan.
And then number two, I had a meeting with MT Evictions, and they did say that if you wanted to do an eviction on units, and it has to be either you moving in, your parents, or grandparents, not a family member. So
it's
sister. So
parents
it's your
or grandparents,
parents or your grandparents. No, you can't say my sister's moving in. That won't work. I already checked that.
So just know, that's why I'm telling you guys, you got to be careful. I don't know how many conversations I have with people like, oh no, they're delivering them vacant. I was like, really, are they? Because it's great. You guys go in with rainbows and sunshine that my buyers are going to get them vacant, and then we get 30 days into escrow and we find out, oh, the tenants aren't moving out, and now everybody's freaking out. I got you guys. Just assume when you write your offer, even if they accept it that it's going to be vacant, assume it's not going to be vacant. Okay, assume that. All right, Danny, and then Lulu. Go ahead, Danny.
Hey, Kyle. So I have a different scenario, switching from the units to a single-family residence, but with an illegal garage conversion in the back that has tenants.
Yeah, that's not a single family anymore.
Yeah.
So it now because of that illegal unit, it falls into the rules of how you can evict them and when you can't. And you have another issue. In the state of California, if you have a tenant living in an illegal unit and you evict them and they fight you back, you could owe them 10 times the rent they've paid on that illegal unit. So you got to start telling your clients, if you're going to build units, do it right. If you're going to build an ADU, do it right, because that illegal unit could come back to bite them in the ass really hard if they try to evict those tenants.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lulu.
So Kyle, if you take a listing and it's units and it's occupied, basically you just have to say tenants will not be
evicted. Yep. Buyer will accept the property with tenants in possession. That's it. I know that limits your buying pool for those units, but unfortunately that's the state of tenants' rights in the state of California, and that's how it works, and we've got to live within it. The problem is that so many people are like, oh, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it, and then it becomes an issue that the sellers don't believe you. Like when you're telling them the right thing to do, there have been so many people that have told them the wrong way that they don't believe you, and then they end up working with that agent that tells them how to do things the wrong way, and it blows up in their face. Or you guys choose to do things the wrong way because everybody else is doing it, and it blows up in your face. You have no idea how many issues we've dealt with that are related to somebody promising for a property to be vacant and they can't deliver it. So we've got to start stepping away from that. And the only time that we can really ensure that a property is going to be vacant if it's seller occupied. That's it. That's the only way. The only way you could say 100% this property will be yours, home buyer, first time home buyer, or you're buying your home to live in, is if the seller's the one occupying it. If there's a tenant, there are no guarantees. Zero. So we got to be really conscious of that. Well, yeah, it was seller's not even 100% sure. I know my seller has some personal experience. She told, that she's making a reference to, but you got a better chance of them getting out than you do tenants. Okay. Let's say you had 99% chance that you're going to get your property delivered where you could live in it when a seller is there. Okay. Any other question? Go ahead, Jesus.
Yes, when it comes to moving people out because you're bringing grandparents, parents, isn't it the kids also immediate kin?
I thought it was, but we'd have to double check that. I thought it, but I
Okay.
don't want to say yes for sure 100% and be wrong. Go ahead, Bertha.
One last question.
Yes.
So what I would personally do, I will try to get credit from the seller. So I know that because I have a deal coming right soon, pretty soon, like with this scenario. Uh, how many months should I? It's gonna take more or less to evict the tenant.
But who knows?
My
We
client
don't know.
is going to occupy the property.
Yeah, but we don't know how long it's going to take. It could take 90 days. It could take 60 days. It could take 6 months. Here's the issue. You're going back to credits. Those credits, if you're going to rely on credits for your buyer, the lender may disallow some of those credits and then they don't get the money. So again, you can't, you have to be very conscious of how this stuff works. Now, I mean, because also in the credit, you can't leave money behind an escrow payable to the buyer because the lender will disallow that. You can't do any of that stuff. So I'm sorry, but you've got to either roll the dice that the buyer's going to be able to evict them and not have an issue with FHA, and maybe the price should reflect that. Maybe you ask for a lower sales price because of it, or you look at lower sales prices, you offer less. Or if you're a listing agent that knows I have to deliver this to tenants, I'm probably going to have to reduce my sales price a little bit. But you guys have to start talking to your clients. But the credits are probably not a good idea because I can't control that. What if so they pay $2,000 a month and it may take me 6 months. Well, there's a $12,000 credit. What if the lender only allows a closing cost credit of $8,000? Well, now what? My buyer doesn't even get that. So credits are not the answer, and that's the other thing is you guys use credits for repairs. You got to be careful if you're using credits for repairs. If you're already getting closing cost credit, if you're going to amend your closing cost credit to cover some repairs, if you've already got one there, because if the lender disallows that, now are they getting the money for the repairs that they actually requested? So it's the same thing. So I'd be very careful looking at repairs. Anybody else? Darwin, did you unmute?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Let's say I have 2 units and then the seller decides to pay the tenants to live with the housing department. They are already working out in all of that and they already agree with the buyer.
Yeah.
That's something that can I offer to the buyer? Say, listen, the property is going to be vacant because the seller already talking to them.
You can. So you're the listing agent, and you're saying I'm going to tell the buyers, hey, the seller's already working on evicting these tenants. They're working on. I would say that seller. My counter would read something like, seller is doing everything possible to make the property vacant, prior to close of escrow. If property is not vacant 5 days prior to close of escrow, buyer agrees to take the property with tenants in possession. Because the problem is we say, yeah, we're going to vacate the tenants, and then we don't. And then the buyer's trying to sue us. Darwin, remember? So you got to be careful promising anything.
Right.
You got to be careful promising anything.
Right.
Okay? So that's it. Be very careful with that stuff. Okay. Any other questions before I let you guys go, since we went a little bit long today? No? All right. Thank you guys. I want to try to finish this next week. I hope I can. If not, we will continue and we will get through this fairly quickly here. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it, and I will see you all soon.